Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Karim Rodi, and today I'm going to give you an insight of Ayatollah Khomeni, a radical Islamic political thinker who really influenced his fellow Iranian people in shaping political ideologies and shaping the future of what is to be known as the Islamic Republic following the Islamic Revolution in 1979. So Ayatollah Khomeini is the founder of Iran, as I mentioned. He is the very first supreme leader of the country. And really the personality of Khomeini has been really central in the making of Iran's post-revolutionary state. His thinking evolved over 5 stages, and we're going to highlight them. We're going to start with political quietism, and it developed into numerous elements, including constitutionalism, and it ended with political absolutism when he consolidated his power. So Khomeini, as a scholar, he basically had a special place in the religious place of Qom, especially in areas of Sharia law and jurisprudence, in addition to philosophy and mysticism. And having this position, he was naturally an anti-Pahlavi royal family regime. He opposed the regime. And in terms of morality, he didn't put any input or care after, or he wasn't after like worldly phenomenon. He only had God in his mind in conducting day-to-day activities in life. This was the sole premise and philosophy of which he conducted his life and of which he urged his fellow Iranians to act accordingly. And to him, whoever abides by this philosophy will surely be protected. When it comes to the relationship of politics and religion, the role of clergy was a prominent factor that really interested him. And so he developed a theory, which I'll talk about later on. It's called Walayat al-Faqih. And now this theory would really become the central tenet in the establishment of the Islamic Republic. It's worth mentioning also that the clerical establishment was largely apolitical at the time, but was later assimilated in politics as Khomeini wanted it to be. So political quietism in the Shiite tradition basically puts emphasis on law and order rather than on religious aspects, and Khomeini really wanted to change that, or rather, he wanted to stress the element of piety with that regard. And Khomeini's transition from quietism to constitutionalism was really triggered by the fear of secularism undermining the traditional role of the ulama in society, who have an exclusive understanding and interpretation of the Sharia law, because the authority of the hidden imam was, quite frankly, passed on to them. So, coming back to the concept of Walayat al-Faqih, it has been established on 2 specific traditional and rational grounds. Basically, number 1, the government is an essential component of Islam because the Prophet created an Islamic state. And number 2, you have to have an Islamic state, quite frankly, to implement the Sharia. Islamic government basically is the only legitimate tool to put Islamic rules into practice. Otherwise, you wouldn't have, otherwise the beliefs of Islam wouldn't be consolidated. And these were later eventually translated into traditional and rational grounds, which would form the basis upon which Khomeini would adopt his teachings and understandings at his local Islamic schools to shape the new Iranian Republic and to consolidate his ideologies in creating the Republic. So Reza Shah, who was the king and ruler of the Pahlavi dynasty of Iran, his secular elements really prompted Khomeini to write a book that's titled Kashf al-Asrar, and he was really critical of his secular ideologies, and he wasn't involved in politics at the very beginning, but he was later involved in 1962, whereby he depicted himself as sort of, the one to follow with his religious teachings and publishing teachings on matters of religious practices. And basically his argument was, he basically mentioned that the hukumat, which are the government, and the guardianship is the task of the religious jurists, and therefore any jurist of any kind, if he is not religious, shouldn't be involved in any political activity. So he mentioned that they're not going to be ministers, they shouldn't be ministers, they shouldn't be soldiers, or even the dustmen. And the Majlis, which is the council in managing the affairs of the country, if it's the only condition of which it's legitimate is that if it's made up of believing mujtahids who have a true understanding of the divine laws, and if they elect a righteous sultan who won't deviate from that, then this specific arrangement won't conflict with the divine law. So Khomeini was really influential when it came to his ideologies and beliefs in moving his fellow Iranian people, and as a result, because of the fact that he attacked the Pahlavi dynasty and he was very critical of them, he was arrested for being a clerical opponent, and as a result he was exiled to Turkey and Iraq. But he still maintained his influence through his teachings on political groups and reinforcing the principles that the government is only legitimate when it accepts the rule of God, and it is the duty to preserve Islam. And this would, quite frankly, this would be, like, I would say, reflected the formation of the constitution in the aftermath of the revolution in 1979. So the creation of the new constitution at the time, that basis was entailed in the second constitution, which was replaced, which replaced the 1906 constitution. So the theory of Islamic government was a departure point from constitutionalism, and so, to mention again, Khomeini uttered that the Islamic government is constitutional in the sense that the rulers are bound by a collection of conditions defined by the Quran and the traditions of the Prophet. And hence, in this system of government, sovereignty originates in God, and law is the word of God. So coming back to the theory of Wilayat al-Faqih once again, this theory basically challenged the conventional Shiite doctrine of Imamat, which states that the legitimate leadership of the Muslim community belongs to the Prophet and his 12 successors. And so Khomeini proposed the novel idea that our duty to preserve Islam by establishing an Islamic government is one of the most important obligations incumbent upon us. He even mentioned that it's necessary that even fasting and praying. So how and why did Khomeini become a revolutionary? Well, during his exile, Khomeini was in close contact with Iran and was deeply influenced by the wave of new ideas. In November 1973, he urged the Iranians to rise against the aggression of the Zionist regime while the Shia was considered a friend of Israel. He attacked the Shia for creating a Rastakhiz party and opposed replacing Iran's... He opposed the Rizal for conducting numerous actions, and as a result, the socio-political events of the 70s really pushed Khomeini to become, the leader of the unthinkable revolution as is depicted. The Shia's regime requested that the Iraqi government would expel Khomeini in the hope of depriving him of base operations and robbing the revolution of its leadership as a consequence. And so Khomeini, when he went to France, this proved to be really beneficial for him because the communication with Iran was way easier, since Khomeini's declarations were telephoned directly to Iran. And so people had access to his speeches and to his ideological beliefs, and they became really popularized to the extent that they have become, populist, so to speak, under his charismatic leadership. And there were several people, including middle class and lower class men, they were really influenced and moved, and they took to the streets as a result. At the very end of the revolution, the Shia was ultimately forced to leave, and within 2 weeks he returned to Iran amongst, a large, jubilant crowd, and he began laying the groundwork for the Islamic State that he had for so long been imagining. So one lesson that we learned from the Islamic Revolution under the leadership of Khomeni is that he fought a war of ideologies and gave directions to the followers on how to defeat the so-called enemies of truth. And by enemies, we refer to countries like the United States or any entity or country for that matter that opposed or conflicted his ideologies. He knew that while the enemy's ideology is based on nothing but selfish, materialist, lustful motives, the ideology that he presented in front of the world, Islam and justice, consisted of divine motives. The real battle was to win hearts and direct the minds of the people towards divine goals, and I think he was really successful in doing so. So thank you very much for your time and attention.